Welcome to the Stone Carvers Guild podcast. Here you will meet a variety of carvers working throughout North America. Drawing on our collective experience, we seek to share knowledge about this ancient art and to do our part to ensure that stone carving will play an important role in built environments for generations to come. So whether you are an experienced carver, new to the craft, or just curious, put on your safety goggles, open up your mind, and welcome to the workshop.
So, Sebastian, okay, now that we're recording, let me tell you how we don't have a good intro yet.
Fantastic.
For whenever we introduce guests.
No, all our guests sing for us.
Oh, is that a new thing? Is that something we're doing now?
Oh, I don't think you want that.
Sure. So, what's your favorite song to hum along to?
Right.
Are you a singer?
I'm not.
Not a singer. Is that a hard no? That sounded like a hard no.
I mean, we don't want people to immediately turn off the podcast, so probably for the best. Yeah.
Mm.
I don't know. I think they might tune in. They might listen even harder.
We can get a little Good Morning Baltimore from Hairspray. How about that?
Oh, that's right.
Oh, look at Joel. Got the local songs. Is that a local song or that's from a
Yeah. I mean, it's a John Waters classic, I suppose. So.
So let's hear it. we're not kidding.
Good morning, Baltimore. Good morning, Baltimore.
That was beautiful. That was good.
Oh,
that was good.
Know the song.
And that's the line I know.
So what's it about?
Oh, it's the theme from Hairspray, no?
Yeah, and I was just joking. It sounds like it's about Good Morning Baltimore.
Oh no, I mean I would say I know it primarily as a periodic hashtag, as I occasionally post stuff from our fine city here.
Are you a Baltimore native?
I'm not. I'm a transplant. Like almost everybody in Baltimore related to the art scene. I came here for grad school at Micah, so been here ever since.
Okay. And the art scene in Baltimore is pretty good?
I would say so. Yeah, I mean, Baltimore's it's the best city on the East Coast for artists, hands down. In terms of making, if you're interested in making art, if you're most interested in selling art, I can't say it's the best, but we are so geographically well situated that it's the best place to be able to be a maker, to find space, to, not, worry, gosh, am I going to make my bills this month because my studio here costs, like an obscene amount of money. It's nothing like living in, a DC or New York City market. Mm-hmm. Baltimore's far more affordable, but again, like I said, really geographically well placed in terms of being close to those other major markets. So, yeah.
And it is, and it's affordable, you say?
Oh, yes.
More or less?
I mean, comparatively speaking, obviously it's not, you're still on the Eastern Seaboard. So it's
right. Yeah.
You're only going to get so affordable, but you can, there's still space, there's still reasonable. I mean, every place is getting a little bit more expensive recently, certainly in terms of rent and things like that. But, finding, places to work and do your thing. And there are so many, communal artists and maker spaces. I mean, the city is lousy with them lately, which is great.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot of opportunity for people that are like, particularly if you aren't necessarily, going to be setting up an entire shop. There's a lot of like shared maker spaces around, like, the tool library or Open Works or, various motor houses, one down the street from me, a lot of places around that can accommodate, again, working artists, makers, things like that.
Yeah. And you have a symbiotic relationship with a stone mill?
tapeworm? Oh, yes.
No tapeworm.
Just try to stay trim.
That's on the after the podcast.
Right.
Yeah, we're going to cut that, right?
No, Joel doesn't do a lot of editing.
Editing is cheating. So
Yes, I do. So my studio is essentially part of the Hillgardner Natural Stone fabrication shop. So Baltimore being a particularly old city as well, we're home to the oldest continually operational blacksmith and the oldest continually operational stone fabrication shop in the country, and that's where I'm
Wow.
sitting right now. Hillgardner Natural Stone was founded in 1863, so they
Wow.
have a fair bit of institutional presence, um, and so I really got kind of, I guess, associated. I found them basically back when I was a graduate student at the Reinhardt School of Sculpture at MICA. So I was looking for material, and I just happened to be looking up stone shops where I could find some things, and I there's a part of town there are a couple stone shops at, and I just happened to walk into Hillgardner asking if they had, I don't even remember what I was looking for at the time, probably some type of slab material. And it coincidentally, their longtime carver, Joe Moss, who I'm sure you all have probably heard of before, had retired maybe 2 years prior to that point. And so, right place, right time. And the salesperson I happened to talk there to at the time just said, "Hey, well, can you carve letters?" I said, "Yeah, sure." So he gave me his card. I gave him mine. And I would say within a couple months, I got a call from them asking to work on some lettering for them. Actually, actually fixing a typo in a sign. But yeah.
When you went to Baltimore, did you already know that stone was the medium you wanted
Yeah.
to?
Oh, yeah. So, sorry, I guess to back up a bit, I began working with Manassas Granite and Marble, which was a stone shop outside of DC in Northern Virginia, while I was still an undergraduate student at Syracuse University. I was an illustration major, actually, so I was basically a painter. But I had studied in Italy a time when I was there. Syracuse has a campus in Florence. So during my time at school, I think between my junior and senior year, I got a job at this stone company basically in my hometown. And so after graduating, I went back there as a full-time stone apprentice, and I stayed there for like another 3 or so years before leaving to go to grad school. So by the time I was going to grad school, I knew what I wanted to focus in terms of the material. It was just I needed the time and the space to focus on the concepts behind the craft, basically, and really kind of get the really the time to do that. So I knew I wasn't going to go to a graduate school, in the U.S. where I was going to learn how to carve stone. That's not really something that really, really exists here. In that way,
what made you decide to do the stone instead of pursuing painting?
It's way more exciting. I
agree, but
don't need to tell you all.
Agreed.
Yep, yeah. So,
but what did you find more exciting about it?
Well, it's just so much more physically engaging. Because I'm obviously preaching to the choir here, but painting was exciting, and I was working on trying to make painting work that made me enjoy it as much as sculpture. So when I was in undergrad, I really did like sculpture as well. Almost all my electives were taken in sculpture, but I just didn't really jive with the sculpture program at Syracuse University. And so I really did like the illustration department. And so my major was in illustration. They did not allow double majors in art. But I really, even from my days in high school, really loved sculpture, and really wanted to focus on stone carving. And of course, when I went to Italy for a semester, I was like, oh yeah, this is what I want to learn how to do. But I went to undergrad. I had a academic scholarship. The idea of changing my major was like not even I didn't even consider it for a second. That was not an option 5 years there. So I finished out with an illustration degree, but I think that ultimately benefited me in the sense that, I still think of myself, we're all, generally speaking, if you're professional commission, carver, or sculptor. You're an illustrator. You're just
Right.
working in a medium we don't tend to think of as illustration in a more contemporary sense, because we tend to think of two-dimensional things and often digital. But if you really look back, the most famous sculptors people tend to study in art school, they were all illustrators. Michelangelo wasn't just making stuff because he felt like it. He made stuff because he was being paid by, the Catholic Church or the Medici family. Leonardo, he was an illustrator. He was making things on commission. All the Ninja Turtles, they were all illustrators. They were all doing illustration work. So it's still the same mindset. It's just a different technique, different material, different medium. So I never really felt like the degree didn't make sense there. And in fact, I still teach illustration at MICA. Actually, I started teaching in that department when I was a grad student. So I've remained an adjunct ever since. But I still see all of my work, particularly, of course, the commission stuff, through that lens. But even the work that I'm doing for myself, you're trying to communicate something, you're illustrating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
When you were at Manassas, for some reason, I feel like Malcolm Harlow was in that area. Is that true?
Well, yes, there were. His studio is much farther out west towards Front Royal, but I was very lucky to kind of be in that place at that time, in this kind of nexus of all these carvers a generation or two older than me, because the stone shop was founded back in I want to say the 70s by Harold Vogel, who became, I think, the head mason or stone setter. He was working on the National Cathedral. So he basically founded that company in that location because of that project. And so his direct apprentice, Tim Johnston, who was the guy who primarily trained me there, along with Kevin Harriger and Ernie Wheeler, they had all worked with Malcolm and, of course, Constantine Seferlis at various times, because Harold had worked with them on that project and other things throughout the years. So it was pretty cool of me to be able to cool for me to be able to be there and be working on stuff, and then periodically have, Constantine come through and give me pointers and tell me what I needed to change, and say, I'll be back in a week, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It was a pretty great
That's awesome.
learning experience for me. I was very lucky.
So that's that's really interesting. I mean, you're bridging so many worlds in the sense that that world seems like a really long way from MICA.
Mm-hmm.
How much are you able to bring that heritage into like stuff with your students?
Well, it depends. I mean, it's funny. So at MICA, because I'm teaching in the illustration department, that I'm teaching a lot of what I do with them is really about professional practices and things like that, how to understand a project, how to manage working with a client, how to brainstorm an idea, flesh it out. I mean, again, everything I do begins with drawing, of course. I think it's true for probably everybody. You're starting with sketching fundamentally, no matter what you're doing, in the way of any kind of artwork. But that there's many of my students, and it's different than honestly it even was, like, say, 10 years ago, where now, I would say half of my students have an idea of who I am, because it's, any artist or professor, we all have websites and, accounts and stuff like that. So some of them have looked me up, but then there's other students that, have no interest at all. And so have absolutely no idea that I even know what a rock is. So it's kind of interesting to come at it from that angle where I'm really, again, applying the practices of illustration work as opposed to just the techniques. And of course, we're still doing demonstrations of drawing and inking and painting and things like that. But it's really, in some of my upper level classes, it's been interesting to bring in some techniques, because MICA truly does want to create pretty well-rounded artists, and especially even in the beyond that first year, they want the students to still have proficiency with traditional media, not just digital media. So they encourage things like three-dimensional work and stuff like that. So in my last year, I've incorporated, or last few years, I guess, but some things that are actually dimensional in terms of character design, some figurative aspects of sculpture and also some relief work and things like that, because there's a lot of, illustration and crossover between 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional work as it pertains to things like crests and medallions and heraldry. And that's something I've done a lot of myself. So that's always kind of really interesting to bring that into that space and see what, again, students will do with that kind of prompt.
And that illustration is still a craft. There's still the craft aspect of illustration. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a way of thinking about it. It doesn't have much to do with the craft, which is a lot of my class too relates to the history of illustration, because that was a big part of my undergrad. We had a lot in the way of history, and particularly the golden age of illustration, which is in largely in part an American kind of phenomena as we studied it, but the kind of era post Civil War up into the early 1900s, basically when the U.S. had time to start thinking about things like publication and literature again after it stopped kicking its own ass for a little while. And so the illustration really had this boom at that time because of the advent of printing technologies and, of course, literacy increasing. It was the first, times we started doing things like public libraries and school systems like that.
How would you describe your style of stone carving sculptures? We talk about the relationship of illustration over into seeing things come to life. It's looking at your work at sebastianworks.com, lots of fabrics, textiles, things that are not typically found in stone, almost bending the viewer's imagination a little bit. Is pretty cool.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I don't know if I can really describe a style. I certainly have areas of interest. I do find it more interesting to make things out of a hard material that at least appear soft. Because again, it's that kind of cognitive dissonance between what you see and then what you experience. I've always been a proponent of like people physically touching sculpture. Museums do not share my opinion on that matter, but I like for people to actually be able to come in contact with and feel the sculpture, because if your eye is perceiving something, that tells your brain this thing's really soft. And then when your fingers come into contact with that thing and it's hard, it feels extra hard. And it's a really kind of a neat moment or experience, even, if you're familiar with it, if you've done it before, you're the thing making the thing. It's really kind of interesting to be able to move it in that direction. And again, it's really all illustration. It's kind of finding ways. It makes sense to make a hard or flat surface out of something like stone, but to try to turn that into a very organic surface or something that appears to be, soft, flexible, pliable. The challenge of making that in the material is fun. It's part of the fun of it, I guess, what makes it exciting. And it's not an interest in doing like trompe l'oeil work. I'm not really trying to trick someone's eye. I very much want them to know it's stone, which is why I tend to favor stones with a lot of color and veining in them and things like that, as opposed to, a very clear stone, because that could just be cast plaster or resin. I want the viewer to know they're looking at something that is a natural material, and then understand that their experience with it is a little bit different than they might have expected.
Do you have any keys to success, secrets to share about, specific things during your carving process?
I'll let you know when I figure any of those out.
Exactly. Yeah. If you could just distill all of how you do that real quick. Thanks. No, but it's just so interesting. I think, like the pillows or otherwise that, or the drapery over it. It's just, haven't tried it, but
right.
Doesn't look super easy.
What are some of the interesting stones that you've worked in?
Yeah.
So, I have certain stones that I'd like. I do, in general, tend to favor like many artists like light or white marble, simply because you're getting more out of the light and shadow of the thing. Mm-hmm. Also, when I moved to Baltimore, suddenly that was a material that became more available because, not to get too much into a history lesson here, but of course, Baltimore is known for its white marble steps. You go back to those early scenes in Hairspray, they're running through Hamden. It's all those white stair steps all over the place. And that's simply because, Baltimore is located next to, or very close to the quarries up in the Beaver Dam area. So that Beaver Dam marble is all over the place. So a lot of the marble in DC comes from just north of Baltimore. Famously, the Washington Monument is made out of that marble. And that marble is beautiful, but it is full of inclusions and veins and pyrite and feldspar and mica and silica and all kinds of weird stuff. So it is actually pretty challenging to carve, but it can be really, really beautiful because it has so much character and color in it. So I do like working with that stone. In terms of some more, I guess, commercially available stones, I think, I would class Vermont Danby's and some Alabama right up there with any of the Italian white marbles. I really like Montclair Danby, which is a stone from obviously the kind of North Rutland area of Vermont that has really bold kind of greenish gray veins in it because they're not kind of shot through the whole thing in a homogeneous way, the way like Venetino would be, or even Imperial Danby that kind of has a more diffuse veining structure. The Vermont Montclair Danby tends to have these like thick bands and ribbons of that color moving through it, which is pretty cool. So the veining is a little bit more distinct, more like a Calicata veining versus the White Carrara Venetino.
What's the name of the Baltimore stone you were describing?
Beaver Dam.
Beaver Dam. Does it? So all of those different inclusions, are they? Do they change the density? I mean, does the density change with them?
Oh yeah, very much so. It does make. I mean, truly. I remember many years ago making a series of sculptures out of a lot of salvaged marble stairs and taking videos of my chisels, the carbide sparking off the stone when I was cutting through a particular like quartz vein in the thing. And yeah, it can be pretty gnarly. But it's unique to that particular type of stone. And it's the only marble that has all this, it has little bits of, pyrite in it. So it has like a golden shimmer in certain parts of the veining and stuff.
Wow.
And the crystal structure can be really crazy. There's whole sections of town here that have their white stair steps. I thought they were Georgia Cherokee for a long time because of the if you're not familiar, the very large crystals in them and distinct veining. And it turns out, nope, it's just a different part of the quarry across the stream there. And the crystal structure really is that way. It's wild. So yeah, some of the stone with those really large, like crystal matrix. Yeah, I would not be as, interested in carving that for sculptural reasons, just because of the size of the crystals. Sure. But the stone itself is really cool. You can do a lot of neat stuff with it. And then because it has a minor amount of color, that gives you a lot more play within that hue, the range of colors, depending on how you finish the stone. If it has a certain kind of finish, it can be very, very light. If you really polish the thing, it can take on quite a bit of color. So you have, a kind of narrow range to work with as you're creating, textures or trying to describe different colors within an object, of using the natural color present in the stone for that purpose.
I'm on your website and I'm looking to see, is there an example of that stone?
There certainly is. There's a series of pieces that look like very long cushions. Those are all Beaver Dam marble. There's a piece that looks like a series of it looks like a brick stair step. It's just one piece of marble carved into a bunch of bricks. Right. That's that stuff. There's a sculpture of Super Mario. That's formerly a stair step. There's a sculpture of what looks like a little lamb stuffed animal.
Oh wait, so that was a stair step that you?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so like that that lamb was a stair step in my own neighborhood.
And is that just a whimsical carving, or did someone commission Super Mario?
No, Super Mario I did on my own. That was not commissioned. That was kind of a part of a series of a couple different kind of icons from my own childhood. I had done a lot of typical carving stuff. Dead people. Or
I see the Lego. I guess the Lego guy is from that as well.
Kermit
Yeah,
the Frog, maybe.
Kermit the Frog was actually a different type of stone. That was Imperial Danby. And then the Lego man, the little minifig, that was Royal Danby. So that has the really kind of stripy gray veins, really. But, all from that same area.
So can you tell us about salvaging a stone? Where are the places?
Yeah. So I should preface this simply by saying, yes, I've salvaged quite a bit of stone. I've never stolen stone.
There you go.
Sure, right.
Anybody's personal property. I've only, liberated some stones from construction sites or other areas where things have been cast off. Because, the sad fact of the matter is, in a lot of cases, parts of the city, of course, if they're divested of and they get redeveloped, they're just building new. They're not trying to renovate what's there because it's just much, much more difficult. And commercial developers and contractors, they have to dump their construction debris, commercially, which means they're paying by the pound. So they would much prefer not to save those things and plow those stair steps into the foundation of the new building they're going to build, versus having to take it somewhere to dispose of it, at great expense. And so in those instances, that marble is mine. But, at this point, it's like certain circumstances where I see something, I might, throw that in the back of the pickup.
It's amazing how people don't realize, I guess they just don't see the amount of, just for the block, not even the work that's gone into the stair step or whatever, but just just the block itself represents so much labor.
So much.
And to just toss it into a foundation.
Right. That's truly,
insane.
It's, again, we could go off on a whole tangent on this stuff, but that was kind of the genesis of some of those early pieces I did in that. That looked like stair steps, looked like cushions, were stair steps, looked like cinder blocks and things like that, or bricks, because those are the construction materials replacing all of these white marble stair steps in the city. They're just replacing with cinder blocks slathered in concrete or bricks stacked together, which always looks, terrible. It's nice initially, but then inevitably the bricks on the edges fall off, or they stick a rail in it and it all comes apart. It's a real mess, and it's a shame to be replacing, these this kind of point of pride, culturally speaking, for Baltimore City, these white marble stair steps with cast, and nothing against brick. I love brick as a construction material, cinder block less so, but that's just a lot quicker and a lot easier. And so it was, kind of important to save some of that material as it was possible. And that sculpture of the lamb was kind of the first piece that, everyone looks at stone carving and thinks of all the history and stuff behind it. But I started looking at the specific history of the stone for the piece. And that kind of became a big part of a lot of my own sculptural work, is not just that it's made out of stone, but that it's made out of this particular stone. And this particular stone came from this particular place and was this particular thing, that kind of thing. And, that Beaver Dam marble is precious in that way. You cannot get blocks of it anymore from the quarry. That quarry only makes crushed construction grade, aggregate and dust now. Yeah, for other.
So salvage material is the only way to go.
Correct.
So it's kind of a guerrilla activity.
Yeah, a little bit. I
feel like we need a movement.
Well,
right?
It's very heavy guerrilla activity.
What do you think we're doing, Bethany? This is the movement.
This is how it starts.
Do you do this too, Matthew? I need to get in on this.
No, we have plenty of stone out here in Texas. But they're still quarrying. But I do like the idea of rescuing material. The cinder block, I'm stuck on the cinder block because it looks exactly like a cinder block.
Oh yeah.
And I'm just wondering how many people just think it's a cinder block.
Well, a lot of people do think it was, again, the irony of that particular piece. It just happened to be a pretty clear piece of marble, which most people listening know, clear just means veinless. And so it was actually a little bit clearer than I wish it was, because it doesn't have a lot of veins in it. So a lot of people
Right.
just assume that, this particularly, in the advent of engineered stone products, everyone just assumes everything is ground up,
Sure. Right.
natural material mixed with epoxy thrown into a mold. And so you do have to explain to, this becomes somewhat common in my shows, just to explain that, no, it's not cast. That's just a natural piece of stone. It was a block. And so, yeah, you definitely did get a lot of people just saying, oh, you can overhear conversations and galleries and stuff. And people are, look, they, oh yeah, that's in particular, you don't want to be a jerk and walk up to some parent who's explaining this to their child with great confidence, how someone created a mold and cast this into there. So I'm happy to let them.
Or that it is a cinder block and it's conceptual art or something.
Well,
Yeah. There you go.
yeah, actually.
Yeah, right. That it's just totally modern. Oh,
well,
look,
yeah. So yes,
Duchamp.
it's happened.
He found a block. He put it on a pedestal.
Yes, I've had to learn when I have studio visits, I can't leave white towels lying around the studio.
Sure.
Because it's very confusing for potential collectors sometimes.
Does this? Yes.
Or they get excited and say, oh, you're working on this? And or again, you have to point out stuff where they don't. I've done a series recently of, a branch off of another series of canvases I've been carving, but the canvases themselves are covered up in drapery of a specific type. But you do have to point it out, because otherwise people think you just have a canvas covered up in your studio, and they don't necessarily clock that that is itself the carving. And I mean, it is a compliment.
I was going to say.
Sure. And not only that, but it seems like that at first it might be a little frustrating, but then the element of recognition and delight that you probably, I'm sure that you see that as well, that when people realize what it is that they're actually looking at, kind of like what you were saying about touching the fabric and realizing that, oh, this isn't a towel.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, those towels that I made a sculpture some time ago of a series of 3 towels. And yeah, that is definitely the most, it was made out of white Carrara. So the stone itself is very, very white. It doesn't have a lot of veining in it. And, that was one of the reasons that led me more towards using some of these other domestic stones with strong veins in them, because people would, like truly not being hyperbolic, they would walk into a gallery space, look across the room, go, oh,
and try to clean it up.
Great. Modern art, and walk out.
I thought you were talking about the staff would try to clean up your art.
Oh, no. I haven't had one of those Art Basel moments where someone threw away my sculpture.
Oh, no.
Right.
It has to be pretty strong. But no, people definitely looked at things that have been hung on the wall that I've done and just been like, contemporary artists, and walked out. And so there's that, which,
Yeah, I like to imagine that in Sebastian's house. You've got like a stack of towels, so guests who come over, stay the night or whatever, they go to reach for one and break their hand.
All his hand towels are like a neon green,
Right.
like clearly artificial color.
Well, I was going to ask, in what context would these, like the ones that you have of the textiles and things, would that be enjoyed? Would it be mostly gallery art, or what context are those seen in usually?
well, wherever someone's willing to hang it or show it. But so I've done pieces like that were, so like that piece, it would initially hung in galleries and things. Over the years, it was recently in a show at the Academy Art Museum, and it was actually acquired by that museum. So we're in the process right now. They are reinforcing a wall right now.
Oh, so
it can be hung there permanently, which is great.
For which piece?
This is the towels. The yours, mine, ours.
I was just getting ready to ask: are those rods? Did you build those? Those are not just regular towel rods.
Oh yeah, they're very, very strong.
Yes,
no.
right.
No, it is the towel rods hang on the towels. The towels themselves, of course, attached to the wall through a kind of
Gotcha.
pinning process. So the rods are hanging on the towels, basically,
Gotcha.
and
Okay.
of
Yes, of
course,
course. That makes
the
sense.
rods are attached to the wall in the normal method, but then they are inserted into the towels, in a way that makes them kind of visually disappear into it. But yeah, the towels, there is like a brief moment during installation or deinstallation where the towels are just on the walls with no rod at all. It looks like they're floating. But yeah,
It's really interesting because, like, now that you explain it, of course, that's the way to, but I just, because it's so realistic looking and so just mundane, I
yeah.
couldn't wrap my head around the idea at first that you're not hanging the stone on the towel rods. Got
Right.
it.
No, you're not the first to ask. I mean, certain people ask me, like, "Gosh,
Sure.
where did you get those towels?" I was like, "Oh, I got them at Restoration Hardware. They should sponsor me."
Yeah, no doubt.
But
Stress
Sounds
test.
like an ad in the making.
really sturdy. Yeah, it
That's
was
great.
it's pretty funny.
Well, I wanted to ask you about, like, so Hill Gardner,
Yes.
when you started there, I'm trying to get the timeline. So I can't remember when we were there. I guess it was like in 2000, maybe
Um,
12 or 11, sometime
yeah, I
around.
think it was actually 2012.
Oh no, it
Because
would have been later, 2014, probably. Actually.
well,
Oh
no,
no, no, no,
I
no.
think like any parent, I measure all time by like
Gotcha.
the birth of my children. So I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, your kids were newborn
Yeah,
at
I
the
had
time.
one very, very small baby at the time because I was working on a piece there. I remember which, and I assume you guys do this as well. It's like you can remember certain times in your life by like which particular project you're working on because our projects
Yes,
tend to be measured in months.
right.
And so I remember what was in the studio when I had the Carvers Guild meet here, and so I'm pretty sure that was in 2012, like the fall of 2012. And we had actually just Hillgartner had just moved to our current location here in South Baltimore from a different stone shop, not too far away.
It was a lettering.
Yep.
I'm looking again on your website.
It was
It was
a
really
letter, a
big.
panel for St. Patrick's Cathedral.
Yes, I'm looking at it right now. That was
900 letters or
amazing.
something.
And did you gilt those letters,
They were
or
palladium leafed, yeah.
okay, palladium leafed? Cool. And when you get a commission like that, is that something you have to kind of just learn how to do, or have you trained doing that long enough that it doesn't come across that way to you?
Well, I mean, in terms of the lettering and things like that, that was part of my, training when I was back working under Tim Johnston there. And that was kind of one of the, certainly the most, I would say, certainly financially advantageous things I'd learned is that, is just being able to carve letters because
Right.
there's not always occasion for them. There are certain places that need them. And it is a very distinctive look from any other method of making a lettering in, signage or whatever versus sandblasting or something.
I was thinking more about the palladium leaf. Like, first
Mm-hmm.
of all, I've never even heard of that. So
Oh.
I'm assuming that it's kind of like gold leaf.
It is. So palladium leaf is just silver gold leaf, but it is like the non-colored version of metal leaf. It looks silver, but palladium is basically soft platinum. So
Okay.
palladium is itself an element. It's not necessarily, it's not an alloy. It is an element on the periodic table, but you don't use palladium in jewelry and things like that because it is really soft. But it can be hammered thin into a leaf like gold leaf, but unlike silver leaf, which if we get a request because sometimes gold's just not the look people want, but when you're using palladium leaf versus silver leaf, palladium leaf, like gold, is non-oxidizing, it's non-tarnishing, it will last forever unless acted upon. So if I get a client, pro tip, if someone asks you for silver leaf, tell them no and say we can do palladium leaf and that will look like that, but the silver leaf will tarnish. Even indoors, it's going to turn green like brass or something over time. And so, your palladium leaf is essentially the alternative to that.
What a timely discussion.
Yeah, Bethany's
Yes.
doing a gold leaf lettering project right now. Is that right?
Oh yeah, yeah. And I mean, I put a little post on the guild, and plug for the guild to all our listeners. You want to know stuff about how to do stuff, join the Stone Carvers Guild, and then you can ask all your questions. The forum is great. Yeah.
But did you get all the answers you needed, or do you want to query Sebastian a little bit?
Oh, I got more answers than I needed. Like I'm still, I ordered some stuff, but then I still have a whole bunch of advice to sift through. Yeah, I can always use more. But,
Return that silver leaf you bought.
Well, if y'all would indulge me, because I have never done leaf, like I've never done that. What is the process?
Oh, well, Sebastian should talk.
I was going to say, you want to go ahead, Bethany? Since we're on right now.
Nope, you're the guest.
Sebastian, you should take the lead, but Bethany, you can correct him whenever
okay.
Whenever he makes a mistake.
Yep.
Well, I think the thing is to note, actually, I should ask Bethany, what method are you using? Because there's many. I think that's the thing, too. There's a bunch of different ways.
The
types.
Like put a primer on, then put on the glue stuff, and then the like paper-backed leaf that you rub on.
Yep. So the patent leaf is, so I'm assuming it's an outdoor project?
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, so you don't want that stuff to blow away.
Right. Right, yeah.
Yeah, and basically that's it in a nutshell. It's a matter of sealing your material and then applying that gold leaf. And the gold leaf itself, of course, comes in two different types, whether it's loose or patent. And patent, I don't know why they call it that, but it just means that the gold leaf itself is attached to that very fine paper that would normally just separate the leaves of gold in a standard loose leaf booklet. And I'm trying to remember where anecdotally, I feel like I heard that making that paper costs almost as much as the gold, simply because it is so fine.
Wow.
Yeah, it's wild.
Maybe you can help us too. So the thing that I ran into that the gold leaf company wouldn't tell me was, they could recommend what kind of sorry, the word is escaping me. What's the technical word for the glue? The sizing. They could tell me about the sizing and the which gold to buy and stuff. But the thing that they said was not their expertise was how you prime the stone. And apparently that differs depending on the kind of stone. And I'm actually doing one ceramic thing and one stone thing. And so I wasn't sure if I needed to do a different primer for the ceramic. And so do you know about what kinds of primers are appropriate to different kinds of stone for exterior use?
What I've actually kind of moved to, so I'm not sure what company you're working with. I tend to work with Sepleaf in New York.
Okay. Not that one.
SEPP.
No. Okay.
Sep. They're great. If you have questions about, they will literally work through an estimate with you in terms of trying to figure out the area of material. And so they're great. I can't remember the name of their owner right now, but she's really awesome. And, you're in Virginia, right?
Yeah.
So they're in Manhattan. And so their shipping times to me here in Baltimore are very fast because we're right on 95. And so I've run into situations before on big projects. I'm like, oh gosh, we're going to run out of gold leaf, and gotten shipments very quickly for various things. So they're great. I definitely recommend working with them if you've got some kind of technical questions.
Yeah, good to know.
Now they're not stone experts, so they will admit that, but they're still very, very knowledgeable. And so there's a product that I've started using. I've used their material for a long time. The name is Kollner. I think it's German. Okay. And they have that kind of 2-part sizing primer. There's a bunch of different ways to do these things. And I know people that do a lot of water gilding and stuff, but for our purposes, generally speaking, especially if you're using something that's going outdoors, you want something that's very durable. And so Kollner has a 2-part process, but they also have a single step sizing, and I believe it's called rapid size, but it is engineered specifically for stone.
Oh, okay.
And it basically that's the only thing I'm going to use forever, because it is quite expensive. But I think the thing that most people don't necessarily, take into account with this kind of work is like what you're really paying for is time. So if you can be more efficient and have as good a product like that, there is no amount of money that is too much to spend on tools or supplies or anything like that, as long as it makes a better, more efficient, method for working.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you're the most expensive component. Yeah.
So the process, you carve the letter,
mm-hmm.
and then you prime the stone,
mm-hmm.
and then you put in an adhesive.
Yeah, the sizing. Yeah.
The sizing, and then you lay in the leaf. Do you get the leaf so that it's a perfect fit, or do you then trim the leaf after you've laid it in?
No, there's a lot of waste involved, unfortunately. Generally speaking, the leaf of gold itself is going to extend, past the carved surface of the letter,
Okay.
or whatever object you're working on, and then a lot of that is just going to get brushed off into the wind. So
you brush it off because it doesn't adhere. Is that why?
Correct. If there's not sizing on the surface, the gold will not stick to it permanently. I might again, gold leaf is like microns thick, meaning it's so fine it will stick to like a surface that's tacky. This could be particularly tricky in like wood. I do a lot of wood carving as well. So gold leaf will kind of stick to a surface that's been lacquered or polyurethane or shellacked a little bit, but if it's not sizing, it's not really adhered to it. So you have to kind of carefully get it off those surfaces. But yeah, I mean, it's going to stick to where you put the sizing. The tricky part is making sure that the sizing goes only where you want it to go. So if you're doing something that has a rough or a porous surface or a rock pitched surface or flamed or something, you've got to be really careful about the application of that sizing, because getting it off of that really rough surface is a real pain in the butt.
Mm.
What's the work time like once you've applied the sizing? Do you have a clock that's ticking?
Mm-hmm. It depends on the sizing. The stuff that I'm using, I believe it has a advertised workable time of 15 minutes to 8 hours, which is a huge window.
That is a big window.
I would never put it to test like that.
It's either a break, coffee break, or your whole work day.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty wild. I would generally it depends on what you're doing, but often it's like by the time you get through the process of hand painting in that sizing, you come back to the first letter, you're ready to go. But it is nice that you could work an entire area and then come back to it if you wanted. Yeah. But there's certain sizing types that have a very narrow window. And then there's other kinds that have like a 2-part, you put the sizing on, and then there's a thinner liquid activator that reactivates the sizing itself. And then you got from that point, another finer, window to put the metal leaf on. It kind of just depends on what product you're using.
Well, I appreciate you going down that rabbit hole a little bit with me because I've never done it. So you were working on that project in 2012.
Yeah.
And it seemed like that the space was, y'all were moving into that space. Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, I think we had moved in, but we were still kind of getting going. We've been here now, I guess 7 or 8 years now, maybe 7 or so years.
And y'all did a lot. There was it looked like y'all had a pretty full mill there. Is that true? Or
well, the Hillgartner has a fully operational stone shop here, so it's not a mill per se, but I mean they've got a bridge saw and a fully a slab polishing machine and a stone jigsaw and a milling, I guess not exactly a milling machine, but like a radial arm router that could put certain edges on slab material. Right. And so they've got the facilities to do any kind of really, generally speaking, architectural stone fabrication that you might need. So yeah, they've got all of that capacity.
And do you have a separate space that you work in? You're not. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically it is separate from the rest of the fabrication, but, essentially separated by like a pass through and a hallway, and there's a garage door. So I've kind of just got kind of my end of one part of the shop where, I work on, various things that whatever I'm working on at the time, whether it's a project for them or a project that's a private commission or a project that's just of my own.
That's
creation.
really nice to have that kind of, we were talking about that, I think last week, as far as like being a, professional carver, having relationships with, larger operations that are doing, more architectural, just kind of general work is just really helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been a really good, working relationship. I've been able to, maintain still my, technically independent contractor status. Essentially, I'm a freelancer, just like any artist or illustrator. But I do have like a pretty steady, a reasonably steady stream of work through them. But as time has gone on and I've done more work myself, the kind of balance of work that they bring to me and work that I bring to them has, somewhat equalized to a degree. So it's kind of nice because there are certain clients that are looking for something from me that my ability to refer them either to or work with Hillgardner to accomplish whatever it is that they need in terms of like material sourcing, delivery, installation, that kind of thing. And then Hillgardner being able to work with clients where, again, they're larger stone fabrication operation, but they can still accomplish some of the kind of ornamental or fine detail things or things that deal with text typography and design that might not normally be in the wheelhouse of a fabrication shop that I can accomplish. And it's funny. There's certain times like, I'll get together with one of the project managers and be like, hey, we got a call about this job. We have both gotten the same call about the same project from people. It happens pretty frequently, of course, it's a small world.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really has been a great working relationship.
Do you have any apprentices?
I don't.
You don't?
No.
It's a big commitment, isn't it? I don't have any either. I'm just like,
you tell me I'm supposed to.
No, not at all. I mean, it's kind of. I mean, it sounds like you're doing some teaching already, so you're passing it along.
Well, maybe we can consider his social media presence as an apprentice, if you will. I'd like to touch on that a little bit before the end of today's chat.
Yeah.
Sebastian, you're a social media superstar.
Right. Yeah. More so than anybody else in the guild, as far as we could tell. Or like you're more active than pretty much everybody else.
Maybe a low bar for, social media being what it is.
Yeah, he's the most tech savvy.
Well, right. I know it's a big lot, but yeah.
Of ye old Stone Carvers Guild.
How'd the social media thing come about?
My wife, basically. So yeah, my wife is literally in digital communications. So, if you're going to be a professional stone carver, you should either, marry a medical professional or someone in communications, I think. That would be my advice. Because I've certainly done stupid things and dinged myself up over the years, but having someone who she was basically the impetus behind me even starting an Instagram account. I was not particularly into it, but realizing like this is basically free advertising, and social media, again, it is all, and to some degree, it's a facade. People are only putting on there what they want to be on there. And so the idea of someone talking about their Instagram life, it's not, I'm not going to be posting images of the really boring or grueling things that are going on. And I personally, have like a kind of like, relatively speaking, like no negativity, kind of like, I don't want to go on there to just complain. So trying to keep anything that's there, positive and to some degree. But yeah, she basically set up the account for me years ago, and then reminded me to post on it until I could just remember doing it myself. And I mean, I know, like, for instance, literally recently, I haven't posted much of anything for a while, only because I am really behind schedule on some stuff. And there's a handful of projects that I'm working on that I, for legal and other kind of disclosure reasons I just can't post about, which we all deal with from time to time, where you're working on a certain project. It's like, oh, this is like a big part of what I'm doing right now. I can not able to talk about it. And you get that with a lot of like certain private memorial work and or institutional and governmental commissions, which is great work, but you're not going to be able to discuss a lot of it till after the fact, if at all. But also, social media, it's a double-edged sword, because it can be an incredible time suck, which I get. It's just like, feeling like you have to post something and be responsive because of, the algorithm or whatever, which is just a real pain when your studio time or time in the workshop is relatively limited. And then I always think, well, I'll do that when I get home. And then you don't want to do that when you get home. I don't want to be on my phone when I'm there with my kids, or by the time it, it's dark outside. I don't want to be on my phone anymore. I certainly don't want to be on social media. So that's like a little bit tricky. But that said, I think social media has worked out for me anyway in the best possible way, because it has been there for me to meet other artists and other craftspeople, and for them to find me. And I have done real work with those people, whether it's like an actual commissioned project. I met an artist, who was in Mexico, Hector Alvarado. He's a stone sculptor outside of Mexico City, and he happened to be coming to Baltimore because he had friends here, and we met up, and then we worked on a pretty major project together. I spent months doing a lot of carving in DC at the Eisenhower Memorial a few years ago with the guys up at the John Stevens shop, Nick Benson and Paul Russo. And Nick found me on Instagram. We just were following each other. And, Nick is like the John Stevens shop in general. It's like one of the preeminent lettering companies in the world. And I would not have been invited to work on that job if not for the fact that I had just had an Instagram account and we followed each other. And I happened to, again, be in the right place at the right time. I'm here in Baltimore, not that far from DC. So that social media, the digital becoming like real life working experiences and relationships, like I think that's when it operates at its highest possible level. And so on that level, it's worked out for me pretty well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, the aspect of meeting other carvers, as opposed to, I feel like when you hear artists talk about using their Instagram accounts, it's more in terms of, getting the word out so that people will buy things from you. But that perspective, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I don't do a lot of, it's not true. There are definitely people that have found me via Instagram and things like that. But most of, the institutional work and stuff, it's having a website, which sounds almost antiquated anymore. But it tends to be like people that are serious collectors or institutions. They're still going to be referring to a website and like, does this person really exist? And that kind of presence, where social media is essentially like a pathway to that. But I think that tends to be the case. It's more often than not, I'll have people that say, oh, well, I Googled, stone sculptor or something like that, or stone carver, or they see, my name somewhere in I don't know, an article or something like that, but they're referring back to a website actually. So having that there, and I can distinctly remember in grad school, a visiting, I guess they were a curator, said to me at some point, they invited me up to New York to visit the museum where they were curating at the time. And we had this great meeting and all this stuff. And they asked for my card. And I think the card did have a URL, had a website on it. And at the time they said, is this your website? And I said, yeah. And they said, is it current? I said, no. They go, let me know when it is. And they're like, because I like your work and I would tell other people about you. But if this doesn't go anywhere, you don't exist. And that always kind of stuck with me, because that it's generational to some degree. It's like, professors that were, working when I was in college, wasn't the case for them. They didn't necessarily have websites because they didn't need them. That just wasn't the era they were coming up in. But as a, I guess, elder millennial, I'm bridging that space between like, I kind of have to have a website.
That is a new phrase I've not heard before.
Right.
It's true. That's how I feel.
Elder millennials.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. You know, I don't know how much time, you know, Bernini spent on social media, but
one more social media question. Do you have any, say, reels that are, because I'm always like, oh, yeah, that's awesome. Do you have any, like, hey, it's the time lapses that perform great on average, or it's the close-ups or revealing a work? You know, is there anything you're like, oh, this one's going to be awesome?
Man,
or is it, nope, I have no idea what's going to hit next?
Well, so I think that in general, it's doing things in time lapse or taking clips of real time carving and then cutting them all together or something is helpful. But that's a lot of work, honestly. It's like,
right.
I'm not a video editor. I don't know how to do any of this stuff. So anything I've done, it's all stuff I've done in my very, very old iPhone SE. You know, it only has one camera lens. So there's none of it's that great. But being able to use time lapse to show something that does take a really long time, you know, and people, if they're only watching you in real time carving, they may watch you for half an hour and everything looks the same, you know. So using time lapse for that purpose is, I think, pretty cool. People do tend to respond to that. However, you know, that said, like, I think like the video or reel I posted that's got the most interaction was just a one-off stupid clip of me scraping a piece of stone with like some audio clip of SpongeBob in the background. Like,
yes.
There was almost no thought put into that. But, you know, because people like, I don't know, happen to respond to a silly clip of a cartoon that I never even watched myself. There you go. So again, it really is a crapshoot. And, you know, I truly feel like I know other artists and particularly people that are crafts people that they kind of deal in high volume sales where they're making a lot of certain things. Whether, you know, it's screen printing or whether it's making like, you know, ceramic work or turned woodwork or things like that. And if they really rely on Instagram and some of these social media outlets for their sales, it is really tough because the Instagram algorithm and everything else keeps changing and trying to promote things. And of course, some years ago, they basically went full in on wanting to compete with TikTok, meaning everybody needed to suddenly become videographers. And if like, that's just not your thing, you're going to really struggle to have, you know, get any kind of viewership on those things. And so, you know, I've been really lucky that I don't necessarily rely on that avenue for commercial viability. But I mean, it's true.
Oh, I've just found, you know, even the process of setting up the camera or that just kind of takes you out of sometimes the flow of just getting into the shop, getting things done rather than having to remember.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Where you've set something up. That's my personal.
So do you see yourself continuing to use it moving forward, or do you, where do you see it playing a role just moving forward?
You know, I think social media in general will always play some role. It's interesting. I mean, again, to see if the platform itself changes and forces change upon us. I feel like, you know, there's been a minor shift of things from Facebook to Instagram. And I think Instagram itself was really useful as an artist because it really was image based. That was the idea. It was meant to, you're not just, you know, posting a written opinion about something. You really need to provide some sort of visual content. And so that's why I think it worked out well for artists and maybe continues to kind of be the primary avenue in terms of social media for visual artists. But I mean, there's certainly other ones and competitors and things like that. You know, and I don't know, there's been a couple starts and stops and who knows, I think there's all kinds of like jockeying in those various industries between Instagram and X and Threads and, the various social media platforms that have tried to kind of pop up to compete with that. And I know that there was one that came up recently whose name I cannot remember right now. I think it was like Kara or something like that, that was specific to artists. And I was like, oh, well, geez, is this another thing I need to create an account on? My God, I don't want to. But, there was this, I think part of what I heard about it, and I know a few other artists and illustrators that I am friends with or follow or colleagues started accounts on it because it was kind of specific to non-AI art, art that was really, crafted by one's hand, which I think that, they've been kind of having an issue with digitally, on these platforms, and it's interesting because I've made whole works about it. I'm working on stuff right now about like our experience of artwork and how it is so mitigated by the advent of digital media. I mean, like you say, if someone's like, oh, well, the fact of the matter is most people will only ever see the artwork of most other people through pixels. You haven't actually seen those sculptures in many cases. Most people, it's like, oh, what's your favorite artist? They might name an illustrator or a sculptor or whatever. And they say, well, have you seen their art? Kind of. You've seen pixels that have represented the art, but have you actually seen the art? Now, if the art itself is digital, of course, that's a different thing, that the art was created in pixel space to begin with. But if we're talking about sculptors working dimensionally, in particular stone sculptures, obviously, it's a very different thing to see the artwork with your own eyeballs and walk around it and see how it changes based on the light and based on your experience moving in physical space with it, and how perspective and parallax changes your experience of the artwork itself versus seeing it through a very curated space that's about the size of the palm of your hand. It's very different. And that's how most people can experience art. And again, it's a double-edged sword. It sucks because it's not as high a quality experience maybe, but it means more people can see things. So maybe, people that don't have the ability to go to a museum or a gallery or another country to see works of art that they're fascinated with. I know there's works, I've been able to do some of those things, but there's works of art that I've seen only on screens myself. So yeah.
Well, Sebastian, thank you so much.
I don't know that I gave you very much workable advice there.
No, it's great. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
We've really enjoyed this. And
yeah, it was great talking with you.
I guess we'll have to schedule you to come back so we can continue that conversation, because it's really fascinating, this idea of like the mediated experience as opposed to the actual perception of art. It's very interesting. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Do we have some way that we end these things?
Oh, a song, I think.
Oh, that's how we end, is with the song.
Good night, Baltimore. You've been listening to the Stonecarvers Guild podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we hope that you will find us online at stonecarversguild.org. There you can find photos showing some of the things that we discussed today, additional information about our guest, and if you're so inclined, ways to get more involved with the Guild and our ongoing activities. And of course, if you've enjoyed this podcast, we hope that you will subscribe and rate us on the podcaster of your choice. 5 stars, please. We'll be back in a month with a new episode, so until then, keep your hammer up and your chisel sharp.